I always describe it as I feel like I'm on the very edge of this dimension. Like everything is just really heightened, and I feel like I could almost reach into another dimension. And the second my parachute starts opening, I can feel just the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Like this is not right.
Welcome to the Sharp End Podcast YouTube channel. I'm Ashley, the creator and hostess of the show. This podcast aims at minimizing future outdoor accidents by way of storytelling. Real people sharing real stories.
Okay, well, everybody, welcome back to the Sharp End Podcast. I'm Ashley, your hostess, and I have Mr. Derek here with me to talk about a brand new incident that I've never actually talked about on the show. So I'm super psyched to get to know a little bit more about what this sport is and what can happen in this sport. So, Derek, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners, and then we'll take it from there.
Awesome. I'm Derek Demyanek. I'm 32 years old. I'm currently living in Salt Lake City. At the time of this accident, so first of all, this is a story about a base jumping accident that occurred to myself in 2014. So this is almost 10 years old at this point, 9 years ago. But I didn't really talk about it or open up about it for a while, but I am now and have been for the last couple of years. And so I'm happy to share this story. So I was living in Colorado Springs. I had just graduated from the Air Force Academy. I'm a military guy, former Air Force pilot, current Air Force engineer. And this accident happened on October 25th of 2014. And I left for pilot training, I think in March of 15. So it had the potential to affect my pilot training, which is one of the reasons I didn't talk about it for a long time.
Oh, that's really interesting. Because if you talked about it, if you were open about the incident for your base jumping incident, you think it would have affected your military background?
It could have, and that's one of the parts of the story is that the reason we didn't call a helicopter was because there's kind of a gray area on whether or not the Air Force is chill with base jumping. I was on the Air Force parachute team, and me and my four buddies that were with me for this were all on the Air Force skydiving team previously, and we had just been graduated from the academy and got off the team in that May. So the team had a strict no base jumping rule. But once we were off the team, we were like, all right, it's free reign. And then we're not really sure. There's kind of a gray area. Like maybe the Air Force would have been cool with it and covered the helicopter ride. But we also had a friend who was like paragliding a couple months earlier and crashed and had to get life flighted. And they were like, maybe we'll make him pay for it. Maybe we won't, since he didn't have the certain paperwork. So it was just all this gray area.
That's totally stressful. Different. That's stressful when you're like trying to think about being rescued. It's stressful. Like, okay, can I get in trouble for this? Or am I going to pay for this? Or is this going to affect my future career? And also, thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you. No problem. My pleasure. Yeah, I'm still active. That's a whole other story that I actually love talking about now too. I was actually medically disqualified from flying because I chose to get treatment for depression, and I'm super happy to talk about all that. But I'm an engineer now, and I love it. But that's a story for another time.
Well, thanks for sharing. Okay, so this accident happened. You said you were in Colorado Springs.
I lived in Colorado Springs. Your listeners should be familiar with Rifle, Colorado, because there's a lot of climbing on here. There's a big climbing spot in Rifle, and that's where the accident happened. And base jumpers know about Rifle too. Fun fact, actually, there are 3 base jumping accidents I know of at the spot that I was injured. One is myself. One is from a guy named Ted Davenport. And then the third is Steph Davis was life flighted off that spot.
Oh, wow.
And
she is badass.
Yeah, I've talked to her about it a couple times, actually. I ran into her in Moab last year when I was moving to Salt Lake, and we talked about it again. And I was like, yeah, the 10-year anniversary of my accident's coming up in 2024. I'm thinking about jumping the Roan again. And she was like, fuck that. That cliff sucks. Do not jump it. So she talked me out of it, actually. But yeah, that's the initial backstory, I suppose.
So you moved to Salt Lake, you said last year?
Yep, military assignment here. So I'm coming up on my time to choose to stay in or get out. I'm about 10 years, and I don't know. We'll see what happens.
You don't have to decide right now.
Yeah, my boss is going to listen to no.
Yeah. And then what have you been up to lately?
Yeah, so I actually fresh off of Mount Baker, and I just climbed Mount Baker for the second time. First time to get to the summit though, and got back to Salt Lake at like 1 a.m. this morning. And I got to give a shout out to Aiden, my guide. Me and my buddy Brian climbed with Aiden from Northwest Alpine Guides, and we absolutely smoked it. He said we set the client record for our speed time. So yeah, we were like blitzing past people on our rope team. It was really fun. But
and
I'm training for some bigger
1 a.m. like today, 1 a.m. today.
Yeah, yeah. And then I went to work today, and now we're here.
Wow, you're a savage.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, well, tell us the story. What happened?
Yeah, so the way I like to tell this story is to start off with some of my lessons learned, and then you can see where they pop up as I talk about it. And these will make sense more as we go. So lesson 1 is set boundaries and be mindful of lawyering, and I'll explain what that means. 2, beware of weather windows pushing your decision making. 3, Apollo 13 that shit. And Apollo 13 is a verb there. And I'm an aerospace engineer, so you'll see where that comes up. 4, know the exact purpose of every item in your first aid kit. And 5, get friends like mine / know your crew. So those are kind of a good like lighthouse to guide the way for the story. But so setting boundaries and be mindful of lawyering. I'll explain that a little bit. Base jumping is a really unique sport. And the reason I picked those lessons learned is because they're common across all adventure sports. They're not specific to base jumping. And so for this story, like I said, it was my first season of base jumping. I had just gotten off the parachute team. I had 700 skydives, a lot of parachuting experience.
Jeez.
Got into base jumping kind of like very methodically, like I wanted to do it the right way. So there are safer jumps and more dangerous jumps.
Well, can you just explain really quick what base jumping is? Like, give us
Yeah.
kind of paint a picture of what the heck that sport even is.
Yeah. There's a lot of overlap with the climbing community, the adventure community, the skiing community, and the base jumping community. And base jumping is just parachuting off of fixed objects, which is what makes it different than skydiving. It's not out of an airplane or a hot air balloon or some other moving object. It's a fixed object jump. So cliffs, base stands for building, antenna, span, earth. Span is just a bridge, anything that spans a canyon or something. And then there are other objects that aren't classified that are still base jumps, like crane or nuclear silo or like random stuff. I guess those are buildings, maybe. But the gear is totally different too. And there are a lot of skydivers that say base jumping is completely dangerous and I would never do it. So it's a lot different than skydiving, but skydiving is the road in. Like I actually had a guy reach out to me on Instagram today, like, how do I get into base jumping? And I was like, well, start with 150 to 200 skydives and then, then think about it. That's the general road in.
Okay.
So it was my first season, and the safest kind of objects in base jumping are bridges, because if your parachute opens backwards, you just fly right under them and you don't smack into them. And secondly, our terminal. Okay, I'll use those terms a lot, so I want to explain what terminal and subterminal are.
Thank you, because I have literally no idea what those terms mean. I've never base jumped before, so I've seen it done a couple times.
We should arrange that.
But I really have no idea. So I'm like hanging on by a thread here.
Yeah, that's one of the things. That's why I'm glad to have your feedback, because in my mind everything's like makes sense. So in base jumping in general, I never know how much to dumb this down
Dumb it down, my friend. Dumb it down for this little Alaskan.
In general, there's two categories of jumps, and for this story, there's 3 categories of jumps. So there's terminal jumps, which the term in parachuting, terminal velocity, has nothing to do with dying. It is simply just the maximum speed you can accelerate to in the atmosphere. And so terminal velocity is about 120 miles an hour for a human body in free fall. Like if you jump out of an airplane, you'll start falling, and about 10 seconds in, you'll hit 120 miles an hour. And at that point, the acceleration due to gravity will be canceled out by the wind resistance, and you'll still stay 120 till you deploy your parachute.
Are your cheeks just like this the whole time? Like,
yeah, kind of. And that's a rough estimate. You can go head down, or you can get up to like 200 plus miles an hour if you really turn yourself into a dart. But the normal skydiving position, the belly to earth position, is 120 miles an hour. So when you're on a terminal base jump, you basically have enough time to reach 120 miles an hour. And the rough numbers there are an object that is 1,000 feet or higher. That'll give you about 10 seconds or more of free fall, which will allow you to hit terminal velocity before you deploy your parachute.
okay.
That's relatively a safe-ish kind of jump. A terminal object, for example, not that you would jump off of this, but El Cap is a terminal object.
If one was to.
Hypothetically, if one was to go there. It's very similar to El Cap is a Sherog in Norway. It's basically like a fjord of just never-ending El Caps. And I went there about a couple months before this accident, and we were just, getting 20, 25 seconds of free fall off these 3,000-foot cliffs. So those are terminal objects, and they allow you to do what's called tracking, where you like turn your body into a little plank and fly forward once you hit enough airspeed to fly. And so if your parachute opens backwards on a terminal object, you're way far away from the object because you've been tracking away from it for a couple seconds. So that's one category of object. The second safe-ish category of object is subterminal. So let me talk about subterminal, actually. Subterminal objects are essentially anything less than that, but to get to some of the specifics, really subterminal objects are 5 seconds and 500 feet and less and below. So if you're jumping off an object that is basically between as low as you can jump, maybe 120 feet, all the way up to 500 feet, and you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds possible of free fall, that's all considered subterminal. And you pack your parachute differently for that, actually. So it opens much quicker. It's called a slider off or slider down. We don't really need to talk about the specifics of parachute packing, but basically understand that 5 seconds and below is a subterminal object and you pack slider off. 10 seconds and above is a terminal object and you pack slider up. The range in between from 500 feet to 1,000 feet is probably the most dangerous category of object. And that's what my accident was on. And that's why I explained that. Because you're not subterminal and you're not terminal. And the way you pack your parachute is not really ideal for either. And so I call it the not quite terminal realm. And that's between 500 feet and 1,000 feet, anywhere between 5 to 10 seconds of free fall. And a parachute deploying, you pack your parachute for a slider up, because if you pack it slider down, it'll open too quickly. But you're not going terminal yet, so it doesn't open. So it's a parachute's designed to open in terminal airspeeds when it's slider up, and there's no way to really pack it like slider in the middle for like a middle terminal jump. So it's one or the other. So if you so your heading performance, your parachute has more time to, like I call it jellyfish, and squiggle around in that not quite terminal realm, and that's exactly what happened to me and caused me to have my accident. So with that groundwork laid, there I was in Rifle, Colorado, on the Roan Plateau. If you're driving from Denver to Salt Lake on Highway 70, and you look up north to your right, you can see the Roan Plateau. It's just this beautiful cliff band. And there's exit points, which is what a base jumping spot is called, all across it. And you can see Highway 70 from the exit points. It's like pretty accessible. Yeah. Not super hard backcountry, stuff. And
probably a short approach.
Kind of. So the way you run this operation at the Roan Plateau, if you're going to base jump, it's BLM land, so it's like Moab. Is you drive your car up the backside of the Roan Plateau on some dirt roads, and that actually is the longest part of the operation. It's about 3 or 4 hours from Highway 70 to get from like Highway 70 up the backside of the mountain to the exit point, but you can drive your car all the way up to the spot you jump at. And then from this exit point, there's an 800-foot vertical cliff. So right in that not quite terminal realm. And then there's a 2,000-ish foot talus that you like fly your canopy down once your canopy opens, and you land in this like little shitty meadow thing on the side of a hill on the talus. And then you hike out of that landing zone for about an hour and get picked up at the pickup spot, which is another dirt road. And so what you do is you have a ground crew who drives your car off the top of the mountain 4 hours around the back to come around to the front to pick you up. So one jump there. Yeah, one jump there. You can do about 2 jumps a day. And I was up there with my 4 roommates at the time. The 5 of us, like I said, were all parachuting guys. Me and my friend Brandon were jumping, and Stormy and Sam were the ground crew. So there are actually only 4 of us. Our 5th roommate was painting. He decided to skip the jump and paint in his studio that weekend. But he ended up being a part of the rescue team. Story for the future in the next couple moments. Part 2. So Brandon and I jumped, and Sam and Stormy drove my car for the ground crew. The plan was to do 1 jump in the mornings and 1 jump in the evening Saturday, 1 jump in the morning and 1 jump in the evening Sunday, and then drive back to Colorado Springs Sunday night. And so for this jump, we drove up Friday night, stayed in Rifle, and then we woke up Saturday morning for the first jump of the trip. So we drove my car up to the exit point and got there around 8:30 and started gearing up. And it was beautiful. The sun started shining, like beautiful clear skies, no wind, which is exactly what you want. And it works out well because you don't want to jump in the middle of the day there because it is a south-facing cliff and south-facing talus. And in the middle of the day, the sun heats up that talus and like bakes it out, and it creates all kinds of crappy winds. So 9 a.m. was the perfect time to jump, like nice and warm, but not yet hot, no thermals, nice calm wind. We're getting close like that. We're getting geared up, like getting the nerves.
You're psyched.
Psyched, like going to be a sick weekend. So I want to touch on setting boundaries and being mindful of lawyering. So my boundary is my first season of base jumping. This was actually my 33rd jump, which for people who
in your first season.
Yeah.
Wow, you really got after it. You're like, I like this. I'm going to do it 33 times in a row.
And that was, I racked up a lot of those in Twin Falls, Idaho on the bridge, which is a safe object. As I said, safe bridges. For subterminal, the safest type of objects are bridges. And then I went to Norway and was on these safe terminal cliffs. So this was definitely the most dangerous object I had jumped yet. And my boundaries that I set for myself my first season of base were I'm not going to jump any solid slider down objects, which are considered dangerous. So if you remember what we talked about, slider down is like the sub-terminal, the shorter jumps. And a solid slider down object is like a cliff or a building that is in that realm. So for example, pretty much every cliff in Moab is a solid slider down object, which are considered dangerous and not for beginners, not for your first season. You need more experience in how to avoid the object if your parachute happens to open backwards. Some people jump those objects for their first jumps, like, people do what they want, but in general, solid slider down objects are dangerous. And so that's why I stuck to bridges. So that a bridge is not solid because you can fly under it. So I jumped the bridge and I was like, I'm not going to do any solid slider down objects. But what I convinced myself of was that this cliff in Rifle was not a solid slider down object because it was taller than 500 feet. So in my mind, it was closer to a terminal object, which I had jumped in Norway, which are considered safe, than it was to the dangerous objects in Moab. So that's why I said talk about lawyering. I had a base jumper about 5 years ago say, like, I was telling him the story and he's like, man, it sounds like you really lawyered yourself into that one. Like you had your own boundary you set, but then you used this like lawyering tactic to convince yourself
Talk yourself into it.
Yeah, like, oh, this, in my mind, I was like, this object is way more like Smelveggen, which is this cliff in Norway that you only take a 6-second delay off of. So you open up really high and fly your canopy back to the bar at night. And so I was like, this jump's totally safe. It's more like a terminal object. It's not a solid slider down object. But in hindsight, in reality, it's actually more dangerous because it's in that middle ground and it's not defined as either. So instead of just like calling a spade, I was like, oh, I'll probably be fine. It's not, no one's going to, it's not a solid slider down object. So like the base lawyers aren't going to tell me I'm being too dangerous. I'm just going to get away with this one. And that brings me to the second point, which was beware of weather windows pushing your decision making. So this was October 25th of 2014. And I remember vividly that the forecast was calling for snow a week after this weekend, which was going to close off that exit point for the rest of the season. So this was our last weekend of the summer, to get this jump off before the snow was going to make the exit point inaccessible. So
it's called scarcity. It's the heuristic trap scarcity where this is it. This is my only chance to do this until next season, and then you feel like you just have to cram it in and so you make things work, right?
Exactly. So so those two factors, like the whole lawyering thing, like I was like, I probably shouldn't be doing this my first season, but it's a legal jump stateside, like pretty tall. And my friends had gotten away with doing it in their first season. And it was like all these things stacking on top of each other to make me think like, I can pull this off. If
they can do it, I can do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so my buddy Brandon, who was my roommate, who was taking me out to get my first jump off this object, had jumped it before, and he had about the same experience that I had. But he went out there with our buddy Caleb. This is another thing that you'll realize in the base jumping sport. So Caleb was the one who showed us this spot. He unfortunately passed away wingsuit skydiving in 2017. And then another guy that I want to give a shout out to, John Van Horn, JVH. He passed away in a wingsuiting accident in 2016 in the Alps, but he sold me my parachute and he helped give me some advice on this jump too. He actually told me I was like, hey, I know this is a kind of dangerous object. What's your advice? And he was like, oh, dude, bring your wingsuit. He was obviously kidding because, well, that's probably not obvious to someone who does a base jump, but
no, not to me. I'm like, why not? If you're going to base jump, why not take a wingsuit? But yeah, again, I'm so ignorant to this sport. I'm so excited to hear you talk about it.
So yeah, JVH he's a big wingsuiter and he was like, yeah, bring your wingsuit as a joke. Because he wingsuits off that object, which at the time when people started doing it was wild because it's pretty low. But nowadays people wingsuit off stuff in Moab. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So
well, rest in peace to those guys.
Yeah, rest in peace to those guys. They're great dudes, and anyone who knows them, will remember them fondly. So Brandon was taking me out to this spot. He had experience there. I lawyered myself into it. The weather window is closing in. The stage is set.
But wait, did you feel at the time that you were lowering yourself into it, or did you feel at the time that you were confident and like you could do it, or is it hard to know because it's hindsight's 2020, right? But
no, that's actually a great point, and that's something I wanted to mention. Is at the time it did not feel like. That's why I say be aware of lawyering, like because you don't realize it till after the fact. It's like. Right. Oh, I totally was like, at the time it was totally justified in my mind. I knew it was dangerous, but I didn't realize quite how much I was getting outside my comfort zone until after the fact. So Brandon jumped before me. He jumped first because he's jumped this spot before, and he laid out his parachute. So this was the plan. He'll lay out his parachute in the direction of the winds, radio up to me. We had radios. We had great cell service in that area. This is just some tidbits. I was jumping with a store-bought first aid kit in my cargo pocket and a water bottle in my other cargo pocket and a radio. Sam and Stormy, who are our ground crew up at the exit, had radios, and Brandon had a radio. So we had comms, we had a plan. It was getting to be 9:00. The weather was great. Everything was great. Brandon jumped, and we were all nervous, and it went great. His parachute opened great. He had jumped it before, and he flew down to the landing area. We were all cheering, landed, laid out his parachute, and now it was my turn. And something to point out, again, is this is another probably lesson learned, but our plans changed throughout the night and the morning. So we packed our parachute slider up with plans to take a 6-second delay. I won't explain too much of this because you can go really, really down the rabbit hole with all this, which is the more delay you take with the slider up pack job, the better. But we realized on the way up there that we wanted to have more time for me under canopy to scope out the landing area since I had never seen it. So even though my parachute was packed for a 6-second slider up delay with slider up, Brandon and I decided we would take like a 2-second delay before deploying the parachute to have more time to set up for the landing. So that's even more compounding the errors and the potential for harm in this scenario. So my parachute was packed to open one way, made a kind of late in the game decision. And instead of repacking the parachutes, so if we would have repacked the parachutes, that would have, in my mind, changed it to a solid slider down object, which was on my no off limits list. Can't jump those objects. So we just kept this pack job in and just did this whole lawyer
really
tactic.
lawyering.
Yeah. So you can see how these things are compounding. But like I said, Brandon did it just fine. My friend Caleb used to do it all the time. And he actually recommended that. Caleb, the guy I mentioned, unfortunately passed away. He actually used to recommend, even if you take a short delay, pack slider up because it'll open you more nicely in the overhung part of the cliff. But that was all ship data. As we'll soon find out. So all these things are compounding. I have a slider up pack job in my container on my back. Weather's great. I jump and take my short delay, 1 or 2 seconds, pitch my pilot chute to deploy my parachute, and instantly, as it starts opening, I'm like my lizard brain is activated. I'm in. Anytime you base jump, you're kind of in that cerebral, primal, like fight or flight mode where time slows down and your reaction times are really heightened, and you feel like you're on the. I always describe it as I feel like I'm on the very edge of this dimension. Like everything is just really heightened, and I feel like I could almost reach into another dimension. And the second my parachute starts opening, I can feel just the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Like this is not right. It felt like it was opening a little too slow, not kind of giving me the momentum change that I was anticipating. But then, like in a split second, my mind was like, no, that's because you're packed a certain way and it's opening and you're not taking proper delay. You're not 6 seconds. You're only 2 seconds. It's going to feel a little slower. But what was happening while it was opening slowly is the parachute started to do a 180 degrees turn to the right. And for some reason, as my body started to get pulled up right under it, my body kind of pivoted 180 degrees to the left. So it's hard to envision, but when my parachute finally kind of somewhat opened up, I was facing the cliff. My body was facing the cliff and my parachute were facing the cliff. And there was a full twist in my parachute lines because we both twisted in different directions. And so that rendered my parachute somewhat unflyable. It's called line twists. It's called line twists and an off heading. Those are the two malfunctions that were combined. I had an off heading and line twists, which were flying me at the cliff The parachute is designed to open flying forward at about 15 knots, 10 to 15 knots, depending on how you stow your brakes. Again, all physics that could take a lifetime to explain. But needless to say, I'm moving at the rock that I just jumped off with minimal time to react at pretty high speed with a malfunction in my parachute that makes it kind of unturnable, which is something I had prepared for. It's not like I was ignorant to the fact that malfunction could happen. So this isn't going to make a lot of sense, but in skydiving, line twists are not a big deal because there's no cliffs to run into. You're just in the middle of the big wide open sky. So you just wait for them to untwist and start flying your parachute. In base jumping, the emergency procedure for line twists is to reach above the twist and grab some lines above the twist and just pull down on them, which will cause your parachute to turn.
Yeah. Okay.
To avoid the cliff. The problem with my malfunction is that the twists. So I did that. The second it happened, I knew in my mind, okay, line twist, off heading, reach up above the line twist, grab a control line, and just yonk down on it. And I looked up, and you can see in the video, I have a POV GoPro video, but I'm like hands up as high as they'll go, and the line twists are just too high, and I can't reach above them. And like I'm looking up, realize I can't reach the control line, then I look down, and then it's like the cliff is just approaching me too quickly, and I slammed into it. And as I slammed into the cliff, I had a lot of thoughts. My first thought was like, this is how I'm going to die. Because at that point, when I had my accident in 2014, about 80% of base jumping fatalities were due to a cliff strike, like that exact event. Because it's like a car crash. You hit with pretty high force.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So my engineering mind, my temptation for the first impact was to stick my arms and legs out to kind of absorb the impact. But in my head, I was like, I'm moving a little too quickly and I might like snap off my arms and legs if I do that. So like at the last second, I thought the best idea was to just kind of go spread eagle and try to like increase my surface area to like decrease the pounds per square inch of force of impact. So like more surface area would be better. So anyway, I stuck my legs and arms kind of out.
Like a starfish?
A little bit, yeah. I didn't stick my hands out because I wanted my hands to be close to the parachute controls, but I stuck my elbows out. So as little as like, I kind of like starfished into the wall, which ended up being a great way to impact. And I realized after the fact that probably would have been how I died if I wasn't wearing a helmet. I had a heavy duty snowboarding helmet on that impacted the wall when I like starfished into it. And you can see a part of the video that impact, my helmet hitting the wall, broke off a chunk of rock about the size of my head. And
wow.
Like, if I wasn't wearing the helmet, that would have just been my head, like exploding like a watermelon, probably on the wall, which is why people have died from those accidents. So like I starfished off the wall and I was thinking, I'm probably going to die. I realized, okay, I'm not dead. Like I impacted. I was like, holy shit, still alive, still in the fight. Like, let's do this thing.
I can't believe that you're like really processing all this in slow motion. Like I would be so frantic probably that I would not be able to think about how to manage myself when it's all happening so fast. And you're like, okay, you're calculating the speed and the velocity and like which surface area. And like, I'm like, I would just be screaming and crying,
So,
I'm not again, I don't think I'm ever going to base jump.
That's a good point. That's actually one of the things that I really found super fascinating after the fact was recounting my memories to myself. It felt like I had an hour's worth of thoughts in 7 seconds. Like this whole event probably played out in less than 10 seconds. I'd actually have to watch the video. But in my mind, I had like a lifetime's worth of thoughts and activity going on. Like, I'm dying, I'm not dying, calculate the force, like impact this way, impact that way. And it just happens so, it's weird how time dilation, happens in those life or death moments. And you really feel like you have all the time, the rest of your life to think about it. So that's just the beginning. There's still more of the cliff strike accident. So the impact of my first impact of my parachute and myself hitting the wall actually pushed the line twist down far enough to where I could now reach above. I know, right? So I could now reach above and grab that control line I had been looking for. And in a split second, like the second I bounced off the wall, my eyes went to that spot to see if there was anything that I could do. I was like, good. I saw it. I grabbed it. I pulled down as hard as I could. And in my mind, again, at this point, I was thinking, that's the last of the cliff strike. I'm going to turn this parachute around and go land and high five Brandon. And like, we'll be at the pub, it'll be great. And so I grabbed the control line and pulled down really hard. And my parachute started to turn. But I was losing altitude vertically because of the way I was turning the parachute with just a wad of control lines instead of like a normal turning mechanism. Like the combination of the malfunction just made it sink really quickly. So while I was still turning the parachute, I was losing altitude vertically really quick, and the cliff started to bow out. Like I talked about, there was kind of an overhung portion of the cliff. So I probably impacted about 500-600 feet down the cliff. The parachute started to turn around, and I was turning, but I was still sinking. And the combination, I just didn't have enough altitude or separation to fully turn the parachute around before I kind of impacted the cliff again. And I was turned this time with my right side facing the cliff because I was about to turn the parachute to the left. And I just ran out of altitude before hitting the cliff again. And on that second impact, I clipped my left leg on the wall because my right leg was kind of folded up under me. And this is kind of stuff that I realized through watching the video afterward. But all I knew was that I'm about to hit this cliff again. And the second I impacted again, I kind of realized I had lost all control authority. And like, I was kind of along for the ride at this point. So at that point, like you said, you're like, I'd just be kind of like freaking out. I'm like, at that point, that's exactly what happened. I was like, okay, I can't do anything anymore. So fetal position, like it's time to just hit the fetal position and ride this thing out and just like hope to God I'm alive at the bottom. And so that's what I did. I just kind of like went into fetal mode, bounced down the cliff for one more time. And then it kind of like flipped me backwards. And I ended up impacting the talus facing downhill on my butt, ankles, like feet first, with about 30 feet. The last like 30 feet, I just kind of fell because my parachute was like in a wad at that point from being
and you're
tangled
probably
with the
tangled
cliff.
up in your lines too, aren't you?
Yeah, it was just like a mess of lines and gear and I impacted the ground pretty hard, and again, and the dust settled, and so the dust settled, and I was like, holy shit, I'm alive! Oh my gosh! I could instantly feel that my legs. I instantly suspected that both of my legs were probably broken in some way, and that I had probably some other injuries, but I knew that I was like coherent and alive. So the first thing I did was scream as loud as I could, "I'm good," to try to get it so Brandon could hear me. Because my worry was, Brandon, my friends on the top can't see me. Brandon just watched me have a bad cliff strike, probably thinks I'm dead, and everyone's about to call 911. And I didn't want that to happen because I wanted to assess my injuries first. And we also talked ahead of time that we really didn't want to get a helicopter involved if we didn't have to. So I screamed as loud as I could, "I'm good." And Brandon heard me, but Sam and Stormy on the top didn't hear me. I'm pretty sure the order this went in is I pulled out my phone and called Brandon just to give him a real quick rundown. I was like, "Hey, I had a cliff strike. I think my legs are broken, but don't call the heli. I think we can do a self-rescue." And then like and he was like, okay. And as I was saying that, my phone started ringing, and it was Sam calling from the top to find out what happened. And I hung up on Brandon and talked to Sam, and I was like, "Hey, cliff strike, pretty gnarly. Think I broke my legs. Don't call the heli. I think we can do a self-rescue, but like start driving down." And he was like, "Okay, sounds good." And so, that's kind of like the first pause point. Like the accident had happened, took a quick survey, still alive, probably some injuries, but everyone on the team was now notified, like, we're going to try to do a self-rescue. And that was about 9 a.m. So from that point, there are a lot of different ways to talk about the rest of the story. but I really want to shorten that section and just get the high points across so it doesn't take forever. But long story short, I didn't end up getting to the emergency room in Rifle until about 6 a.m. the next day.
Oh my gosh.
So the
Dude,
self-rescue
you are a
took...
savage. Can't
The
say that enough.
The self-rescue took a lot longer than expected. But there are definitely some high points that I want to hit. So we were probably the best prepared crew to deal with this kind of thing in my mind. I was like, okay, this is what I've been training for. Like, I'm prepared for this backcountry shit. Now it's time to go to work. Like, I was kind of stoked. I was like, yeah, this sucks, but like, we can finally put all of our fucking combat training to use. Like, we all had like first aid training, trauma training, just lots of military training. So we were a really well equipped group of people to deal with a pretty gnarly situation. And so the plan was Brandon was going to start climbing up the talus to me. I was going to start trying to scooch down the talus to him. And then Sam and Stormy were going to drive around. And once they got to the landing area, start hiking in to meet up with us. And I anticipated being off the mountain before the afternoon. Like it's 9 a.m., a normal jump on this thing, we'd be off within a couple hours. This talus isn't that big, we can get out of here. Brandon will get up to me and he'll just carry me off like Superman and it'll be fine. That none of that ended up being true. One of the huge contributing factors to the slow pace of the rescue was that the terrain of the talus was such that no one could carry me. I was pretty much resigned to scooch myself off the mountain while they just stood there and tried to make sure no boulders fell on me or I didn't slide off a cliff, because it was like 45 degrees or more steep, unconsolidated bullshit. That's what I call it. It was just like this scree-choss, like nightmare field of boulders and gravel ranging from like
Super
SUV.
loose.
Yeah, you know exactly the type of terrain, like super loose. You're not supposed to hike there. Humans are not designed to be in this area. Ted Davenport crashed there, but he got plucked off by a helicopter. Steph landed way lower. Like, it's just like no humans have ever been there or should be there. And we're trying to pull off a rescue on this shit. So my first order of business was to do a quick, use all my medical training and stuff to do a quick like self-scan. Because the big concern at that point was, we're not going to do a self-rescue if I'm dying of internal bleeding, because then I'm going to bleed out up here. So I wanted to make sure that there was no internal bleeding, so that we could go through with the self-rescue. Because if there was no internal bleeding or like serious injuries that were life-threatening, I could deal with the pain and be up there as long as it would require to do the self-rescue. So I did a quick self-body scan, like head to toe, assessed that my left leg was completely unusable. It was just so painful to put any weight on it that I knew it was pretty much toast. And that my right leg was in severe pain, but I could at least put some weight on my right heel. My right shoulder, I think, was separated when I impacted the wall with my right side. And it was like, it was bleeding some and it was in a lot of pain, but it was like back in position, but it had clearly been injured in the impact. And then I had a rib, I think, dislocate on my right side because it was like really painful. And I felt it pop real bad when I tried to put weight on my hands. And I think that was it popping back into place because it was audibly popped and it was really painful. And then it hurt way less after it popped. So I was like, I think I fixed it. So the status of the condition was like right leg somewhat usable, left arm totally fine, left leg and right arm not usable. So I was like, if you make an X, like one section of the X was usable. So that was actually lucky because it allowed me to scooch, is what I call it. Like I could scooch on my left hand and my right heel and not put any weight on my left leg and my right arm. So that gave me some mobility, which was awesome. But in the terrain and that unconsolidated scree bullshit, I couldn't get very far. So Brandon didn't end up getting to me climbing up the mountain. So I was trying to get down to him. He was trying to get up to me. Long story short, I barely got anywhere. I essentially didn't even move for hours. And he finally got up to me, I think around 1 or 2 in the afternoon. And we had jumped at 9 a.m. And I've been sitting baking in the south-facing sun of this talus with 1 bottle of water in my pocket. And that reminds me of the first aid kit thing. So know exactly the purpose of every item in your first aid kit. I pulled out that first aid kit that like gave me the peace of mind of like, oh, I'm smart. I have a first aid kit. I might as well have not even had a first aid kit because like what the hell is a store-bought first aid kit going to do with 2 broken legs, you know?
A couple Band-Aids.
Yeah, it was like Band-Aids.
Like 1 alcohol pad.
Exactly. So I pulled out the sleeve of like 10 ibuprofen, just like kind of down that and then like tossed the rest of it. I was like, this is completely useless. I think there was some actually medical tape that I used to kind of stabilize my shins. I was wearing shin guards and boots. So I was like, I'm just going to leave those on and let Brandon build a splint with this tape. But they were already pretty much splinted because they were just in shin guards that went to high top boots. So it was pretty solid. But Brandon got up to me at like 2 in the afternoon and his assessment was there's no way you can get down what I just came up. So we have to find a different way down. And I was like, that was the first Apollo 13 moment. That's what I call a lot of incidents in this where, you know, it's like shit's going wrong and you have to just make a decision. And I was like, okay, we have no idea if there's another way off this mountain, but I trust you. Like you say, I can't get down. Like done. Decision made. We're going to find another way. Let's start going. So from skiers, like looking down the mountain, skiers right, he came up and he said, that's no go. So we were like, all right, we'll go skiers left. Scoochers left. So, really a lot happened in the next couple of hours, but basically about 4 in the afternoon, we had kind of funneled into this like creek, like dry creek bed that went down the talus into the forest. And we had no idea where it went because it was just uncharted territory. And we eventually hit about a 15 to 20 foot vertical, like what would have been a waterfall. And we're like, all right, that's the end of the road. Like we made it as far as we can. Now we just have to wait on the rescue team to get up here. And, you know, I skipped a lot of the story, but while I was waiting on the talus, I basically called my brother and our 5th roommate, Joe, and both of them.
Joe that was painting. And he's like, I don't know. He looks like a G.I. Joe. He's like super chiseled, does CrossFit every day. And then my brother, who's like a super rad rock climber, never been in the military, you know, love him to death. It's just me and him. He's my older brother. He lived up in Fort Collins at the time, they were both 4 hours away. So Fort Collins, 4 hours that way. Colorado Springs was 4 hours the other direction. But I was like, Joe and Dylan's my brother, like start driving here because we'll probably be off the mountain by the time you get here. But just in case, grab all the climbing gear you can find. We're doing a rescue and just start driving a rifle. So Brandon and I were on the way down, got to this impasse where we couldn't get down any further. And Sam and Stormy were kind of by themselves because Dylan and Joe hadn't arrived yet. And they were climbing in and they radioed to us and said that they hit an impasse that they couldn't get up. Oh, no.
So there was this opposite direction. There was about a 20 to 30 foot cliff up, like vertical up, that they couldn't get up because the way base jumpers get out is there are fixed ropes at the top of that cliff that they throw down when they hike out because you jump from the top so you don't have to hike in from the bottom. And the fixed ropes had been pulled up to the top. So they couldn't like free solo this cliff because they didn't have any climbing gear. So I was like, okay, you guys just wait on Dylan, my brother, to get there with the climbing gear. Like he'll set up a route on that thing and it'll be fine. And so we're all kind of in a holding pattern. And I know I'm like burning like this. There's so much more. It's hard to tell the story short, but I'm trying.
It's okay. I'm hooked. hooked.
So the second Apollo 13 moment, where we just kind of MacGyvered it, was Brandon and I were sitting there baking in the sun, hungry as Am I allowed to cuss in this? I think so.
Sure.
And
you can do whatever you want. You're so savage.
and we were like, I was like, we might have to set up camp here. One of the decisions we made early on was that we were not going to ditch any gear. Like we were going to drag my parachute out with me, even though it was torn up and shredded, because, we were like, we don't know what we're going to need. So this was the first instance where it clicked into my head as we were sitting there with this 15-foot drop in front of us. Like, we have climbing gear. We have a harness, my parachute harness. We have lines, the lines of the parachute. Like, we could set up a rappel down this cliff and keep moving. And so I pitched the idea to him, and he was like, I'm down. So we like jerry-rigged the parachute to become like, I got in the harness, like a climbing harness almost, and he just kind of lowered me down on the lines. And since my legs were broken, I just kind of like faced out and let my back kind of like bounce off the rock. And then the plan was for him to just like kind of hang down and drop, because it was not quite too big for a person like him to kind of like down climb a little bit. But in my condition, I was obviously useless. So that's what we did. We like self-repelled me on my parachute down the thing, and then got him down somehow. And like, it was like, all right, game's back on. Like we're keeping moving. And a couple 100 yards down the creek bed, we hit another one, an even bigger one. So that's where we actually we was like, we can't get down this one. But it was a big success to get down the first one. So we finally hit an actual no shit, like stopping point. And the climbing team, the rescue team coming up from the bottom, also hadn't scaled their cliff yet. So we call it in the military a bingo time. Like, if we hit this time and the rescue team hasn't reached the injured team by X time, we're just going to call the helicopter or like report this. And again, this probably isn't true, but we determined that if we didn't have the rescue team in contact with the injured guys, myself, by 4:45 p.m., that would be our bingo time to call the helicopter, because we decided that sunset was around 6:45, and if the helicopter was going to come in from Grand Junction, which normally happened, they would need about 2 hours of sunlight to like pull this thing off. So we were like trying to figure out what the rescue team was thinking. In hindsight, the 2 hours probably was not enough time, but that's just what we decided. Fast forwarding, my brother got there. He got the climbing gear. He climbed up. Like, he was in like save my brother mode. So he kind of really was just like hard charging. He's like, my brother's up there with broken legs. I'm gonna go get him. So he ended up, I think, just like.
Is he older or younger than you?
He's 2 years older than me, but we're super close. He's actually 20 months older than me.
He's like, my baby brother, I'm going to get him, whatever it takes.
Yeah. So he, what I'm told, is just basically free soloed that fixed rope cliff, because there was no real pro to set, and threw the fixed lines down to the other guys, but got past that obstacle. And the rescue team was like higher up where Brandon had come up the right, like skiers right. And like a movie, literally at like 4:44 and 59 seconds, we heard these like faint voices off in the distance that were like the rescue team shouting. And we were like, we started screaming, and they like crested this ridge, and we like made eye contact, and everyone was freaking out. It was like, all right, 4:45, we made the bingo time. Like, we're not calling the heli. Yeah. Now the rescue team was together. We had all the climbing gear. Brandon and I could now get down this next cliff because we had like, ropes, harnesses, ATCs, all of the things. This is actually one of the cruxes of the story, but I'm not going to belabor it too much here. But we had almost everything, and we laugh about it all the time, because we were like setting up the rappel. I put on the harness. We were going to get down this cliff. I was going to do some broke leg rappels, like I said, just with my legs kind of dangling. And we pulled out everything out of the bags. We ate food, drank Gatorade. It was great. Everyone celebrated. And my brother just like looked so dejected as he was trying to set up this rappel. And I was like, what is wrong? What is that look on your face? And he was like, dude, I can't find a carabiner. Like, I don't think I brought a single carabiner. In his rush to like grab all of his climbing gear, we had ropes, harnesses, and usually you have like 85 carabiners hanging off every harness, right? So he just assumed there were carabiners in his shit. And we finally get up there and there's no beaners. Like, and so that's the crux moment. That's like Apollo 13, that shit. So like we like all cried about it like real quick. We were like, oh, are you? I was like, there's no way there's no carabiners. Like, we're climbers, we're military. There's carabiners on fucking everything. Like, are you sure you don't have one in your pocket? Like, they're just everywhere.
On your keychain?
Yeah. Like, somebody surely has a carabiner. And so like everyone tore shit apart, and we literally had none except for one like 1.5 inch, like one that says, for a water bottle that's like, do not use this to rappel or you will surely die kind of thing. And we were like, well, let's try that because it's all we got. And all it did. Well, we tried, but all it did was just tear apart and gum up the ATC because we're using ATC to rappel. So it was like totally useless. So, basically I was like, again, I was in go mode. So I was like, all right, doesn't matter what we don't have. What we do have is some shit. Let's figure out how to use it. So I realized that there was a plastic keeper on my harness that I could thread. Like, it would take a lot longer, but I could thread the rope through the ATC around that plastic keeper on my harness and out the other end of the ATC and kind of use that like a rappel. And I was like, oh, this will be a one-time use because it's creating friction on that piece of plastic, but like, I'm never going to use this gear again. We're just trying to get off the mountain. Like, we can sacrifice safety a little bit for what we need to do. So we set that up. That was our first plan, was like, use that plastic thing on my harness, just like tie this rope off to an anchor. Everyone else can down climb the rope hand over hand.
But you couldn't.
But I can't.
Yeah.
So we did that. So I set that up and like got down this 25-foot cliff, but it was like not a very good setup. It was very friction full, like very jaggy, painful, and just like, but it like worked. So, got everyone down that section. And the way the terrain was running out at this point is the creek actually started to fill with water, but there were more and more of these like full stop 20-foot drops. So we had to do that rappel thing like multiple times. The sun went down. It got to be the point where it was like now 9 p.m., 10 p.m., and we're still just like slowly, like we were now getting into parts where Joe could carry me or like someone could carry me through the water. But there was a lot of the time when I just had to like scoot through the water. And
that ibuprofen isn't doing a damn thing at this point.
Yeah. No, my legs, I honestly, like, I think my legs went numb. Like, all the pain just kind of went away because your body just kind of accepts that you're not going to be getting out of this anytime soon. But I mean, it was like steady as she goes. It was like, we're just going to keep doing this until we get out. And we were, it's pitch black. We all had headlamps. There's a team of 5 or so. Me, Joe, my brother, the gang. Stormy was still down at the car, kind of working as base camp manager. And
I'm in disbelief right now.
So this is the watered down version. I'm actually working on kind of writing a book about this because there's just so many fine details.
When that comes out, you better let me know. I'm definitely getting myself a copy.
I will. So I've already talked about all the points. Set boundaries, be mindful of lawyering, beware of weather windows pushing your decision making, Apollo 13, that shit. Know the exact purpose of every item in your first aid kit, and get friends like mine / know your crew. So the last one, it is obviously like, you don't want to put your friends. I don't want to ever put my friends again in those kind of situations to be risking their lives. There was one point where we had gotten down this like I had wrapped down one of these cliffs, and the other guys found a way to get around it on the talus. But my friend Joe, who's my best friend, he's like my brother and I's third brother. He almost got crushed by like a man-sized boulder. Like after, like he got to the base of this thing that he was scrambling down, and it was in the middle of the night, and I couldn't see him, but I just heard this like earth shake, like felt the earth shake and heard this huge impact. And I was like I saw him walk into my glow of my headlamp, just looking like real spooked. And I was like, dude, what the fuck just happened? And he's like, yeah, I just almost got crushed by a boulder, but like, let's just keep moving. So it's like those kind of things that I just would never want to put
Talus and boulder fields are no joke. They're no joke. They're huge. Like you're saying, like car-sized boulders in some cases that can just, once they start to roll or once they get dislodged by humans moving through the talus, things start to loosen up, and then bigger things start to fall over. So it can be really scary.
Oh yeah. I mean, it can be, the story can sound kind of benign, but like or maybe not, but the
not
terrain was super unforgiving. And like my friends were absolutely putting their own lives at risk to do this rescue. Like no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like everyone was in danger. And I take full personal responsibility for putting them in that situation. And they were willing to do it. And the final crux, there's multiple cruxes, but like this part of the story kind of makes me get a little watery eyed, but I love it. But the last, like the final cliff, the thing that my brother soloed to get to me that the other gang couldn't get up, that was the final obstacle to get out. And when we got to it in the middle of the night, we knew we were close, but there was no way for me to down climb the ropes hand over hand. And so we had to set up the rappel for me down that. And the only section to rappel from was like a pretty powerful waterfall, because it like funneled into this point. And it was pitch dark. All we have is headlamps. We're like searching at the top of this waterfall in this pool, pretty big pool, probably about like knee to waist deep, and at parts. And we're just trying to find an anchor, something that we can anchor the rappel system to get me off, and could not find anything. Like tried to hike up and back into the creek, find boulders, because the walls are pretty steep. And so we didn't have like trad gear to like wedge in a crack or set up an anchor. So what ended up happening is after we like kind of had a little meeting where I was just sitting in the pool of water because I couldn't stand, I remember just looking up at the headlamps and everyone kind of just like being totally toast, totally like dejected, but like also just like super determined. And so my brother was like, all right, I'll be the anchor. He was like, I'm going to tie the rope around my waist and you're just going to wrap off me.
Are you kidding me? He is in close. Well, so I think it's your brother and my brother, which are in close fighting for the best brother award right now.
Yeah, no, he's an absolute boss. And the funny thing is, I weigh probably, well, I weigh at this point, I weighed at least 20 or 30 pounds more than him. But like, he had that brother strength. And so, yeah, that's what the plan was. Is he was tied the rope off to himself, sat down kind of in the back of the pool. And then Brandon, who was the guy who jumped before me, kind of like backpacked on him, just like looped his arms around my brother and like anchored him down a little more. And then, another thing that we were doing on these rappels is Joe was going down ahead of me and basically standing below me as a spotter in case the system gave way. He was just going to catch me. So that's what we had done in the past. So Joe down climbed the ropes, got to the bottom, was like standing at the base of the waterfall. Dylan was setting up the anchor, my brother. And it was just kind of one of those moments like, like this is the last thing we got to do. But so, yeah, I mean, I we high-fived or whatever, did the whole like, hey, I love you. And I scooched over to the edge of the cliff, the edge of the waterfall. And it was that splits. It felt the second that I had to talk myself up to scooch my butt off earth and like into the free fall environment of the waterfall felt exactly like a base jump. It was like really nerve wracking. You had to like count down like, okay, 3, 2, 1, hold your breath. Like, and so like I scooched off the edge of the earth into like the overhanging waterfall, water pouring into my lap, my headlamp just like illuminating into the darkness, black hole below. And like the system held. So it's that moment of, if I go, like there's a very real possibility that I'm going to scooch off this and pull everyone down with me and we're all just going to go flying. But like the system held. I took a split second to realize that the system held. And then I was like, I got to get down this thing as fast as I can. So I just like fast roped it like as fast as I could into Joe's arms. Like he caught me like a little baby. We're all soaked. Yeah, G.I. Joe. We were all soaked, like water pouring down. And it was just it was too loud to really talk or anything because of the waterfall. But like, that's kind of the real end of the saga. Like at that point, we kind of knew like we're safe. All of this jerry rig shit worked. No one died. It was Joe pretty much like fireman carried me to the car, got to the emergency room. And that's like I said, at that point, it was about 6 or something in the morning, like close to sunrise. I think the sun had already been coming up.
That's such a long time.
Yeah.
So when you're at the emergency room, what's the prognosis? Did you break both your legs?
So I actually made it out remarkably well. I was actually approaching hypothermia because
You're soaking wet.
I was
No
in the
calories.
water. Like the other guys were not in the water because they were not sitting. But since it was 6 inches of water, but I was waist deep in it the whole time because I was just sitting because I have legs jacked up. So I was approaching hypothermia. They took X-rays of my legs, which were both super swollen. They cut off all my clothes, which is like standard, but my legs were super swollen, and they were like, "Oh, well, your left foot is pretty broken, but your right foot is like." Oh, it looks like there might be some some hairline fractures, and like both your ankles look like they have some chips and stuff, but like your left foot is pretty broken. But it was kind of shitty. They were like, we're actually a really small operation. We can't admit you overnight, and like we can't give you a wheelchair. And they're like, do you think you can walk out on these crutches? And both my legs are completely in op. And I was like, no. So my friends ended up stealing a wheelchair. Sorry, Rifle Hospital, we owe you a wheelchair. But they couldn't give me one. So like I got discharged after some
really
X-rays.
surprising to me.
Yeah, I know. They totally they helped me out as much as they could. They loaded me up with like opiates and shot me up. I kind of like backpacked on my brother to the parking lot. And then I didn't know that there was a wheelchair stealing operation in progress, but like as I was on my brother's back in the parking lot, a wheelchair came, like my buddies like giggling like little girls came around the corner with a wheelchair. They were like, oh, so they like stole a wheelchair. But yeah, I ended up breaking my left leg, my left ankle and foot. And not really breaking my right foot real bad in any way that required significant long-term healing. But both of my ankles were completely, usually with ankle injuries, it's not the bone breaks that's the issue. It's like the ligaments and the sprains and the tears. And so both of my ankles were completely like thrashed, like sprained, strained, everything you can do, just like swollen to the size of beach balls, So I had to get surgery and some hardware put in my left foot, and my right foot got casted but healed on its own. But I had to wait a week to get surgery because you have to sit not in bed. They let me go home, but I sat in bed with my feet up in the air with ice packs on them for a week for the swelling to go down so they could cut in.
Yeah.
But I ended up getting surgery on Halloween that year because I remember coming home from the hospital being totally doped up, and like little kids in costumes kind of like freaked me out. But yeah, I was in a wheelchair for a while. Ended up getting like on crutches by Christmas, and then ended up getting healed enough to start flight school that March. But I remember when I started flight school, my ankles were still pretty weak. So it was kind of like hard to fly on the rudders almost. And I had some instructors. I told my instructors that I was like when we got to the hospital, because we were still unsure of like the base jumping thing, we were like, yeah, we were in a hiking accident and I like slipped and fell hiking,
Right. Well, but at a hospital, they shouldn't legally, they can't give your information away anyway. It's HIPAA, but yeah,
True.
I mean, I don't know if the military can veto that HIPAA law. I'm not sure how that works, but yeah, I can see how you're nervous because you're about to get in flight school.
Yeah, I mean, there was no. I like to say there was maybe a little bit of quibbling. There was no real lying. Like we were never like we definitely weren't base jumping. Like it's not this. This is not a lie. I was out hiking and I fell off a cliff. That's all true. I didn't say that I intentionally had a parachute and intentionally fell off the cliff, but it's not incorrect. So that's what Alex says. A little bit of a quibbling, as they call it in the military, but not a lie. But now it's like everyone knows about the story. It's widely known. All my friends talk about it, so it's like I talk about it all the time now. And we've been kind of told like, yeah, you would have been fine anyway. Probably just don't be an idiot. You should have called 911, you dumbass.
But now you can share this like you're doing right now. You're sharing your experience with others, and so ideally people can learn from this incident from you.
That's exactly why one of the big reasons I wanted to start talking about it. I started talking about it within the base jumping community because I wanted to share my lessons learned from the base jumping side of things. Because as we talked about in the beginning, there were so many things mistakes I made, but very like subtle mistakes that I've seen other people make that led to that. So like I definitely share that story with people in their first season of base. like, hey, don't do what I did. I should have been a statistic. Unfortunately, not long after my accident, someone died of a cliff strike, pretty similar to what happened to me. And so I was like, I got to tell this story because, like, people make these accidents, and I easily could have been one of them, one of the statistics. So that's definitely the upside of sharing it, is like, we do gnarly stuff in these sports, but and we take calculated risks, but there's so much to be cautious of and to be mindful of. And a lot of it just comes down to luck. Like, you can have 5 friends jump the same exact jump the exact same way, and you just are the one that rolls the dice the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm fully healed now. One of my goals I remember when I was in my wheelchair, I was like, it would be really cool to come back from this and run a marathon. And I had never run before, and it kind of lost track of that goal until 2021. During COVID, I got into distance running, and I finally did my first marathon. So that's like the comeback. Is I did
wow.
I did it
again, savage.
Yeah, thanks.
It's insane.
Yeah,
I'm so stoked for you.
Thanks. Yeah. So I got back into things, started adventuring hard again. I've actually done 3 marathons now. I have the Arches 50K coming up in October, which I'm training for. And then I've got some climbs in Mount Baker that I just got off of. Was like the first climb of a kind of a long-term project that I have to hopefully do Denali in 26 and some other stuff. So like, these are all part of my comeback. It's like, all right, I survived, got the surgery, fully healed now, like back to work. So it's got put a nice bow on it.
Mm-hmm.
Nice ending to the story.
Well, when you come up to Alaska in 2026 to climb Denali, you better look me up.
Yes. Is it Denali, not Denali? Do I sound like a...
Either or. It's not McKinley anymore.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's my story.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, Derek. I am so grateful that this is the first base jumping story on the show, and I wonder if I wonder if there's a reason for that. If people in the base community, I mean, for number one, the base jumping community is so small, right? It's so small, and so maybe it's such a niche community that people just don't want to talk about the incidents that happen there, or maybe there aren't enough incidents in the ratio of base jumpers to incidents, and maybe that's why. I don't know why, but it does make me think about why I've never had a base story. You know what I mean? So I'm so psyched that you're the first one, hands down, one of my favorite interviews I've ever had.
Yes.
I was just literally, I'm nervous to actually edit the video of this because I think I looked like this a lot. Like jaw dropped, like eyes deer in the headlights, like, oh my God, you did what? And like, my partner always tells me, Ashley, knowledge is power, right? Ignorance is bliss, but knowledge is power. And so some things that scare me, I avoid them because they scare me, because I have no idea about them. I'm so ignorant to them. But he's like, if you get to know something and you learn something, it won't scare you as much, right?
So true.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. Is there anything, like one last thing you want to leave the listeners with?
I totally understand what you're saying. I've listened to the podcast, I think since the beginning. If not, when I got into it, I went back and started listening to them. But yeah, I find that interesting too, that the communities are so intertwined, but also you don't hear a lot of stuff about base accidents on the mainstream adventure podcasts. And one of the things that inspired me to kind of share this story on this platform is there was one of the first ones I heard was a couple of the podcasts covered a story recently where a climber rescued a base jumper off Tombstone in Moab. And that kind of was the initial bridge of the gap in the genres in my mind. I was like, okay, like I think my story has a place here.
It does. It totally does. And I appreciate you dreaming that up. And what's interesting about that story is I asked River, I was like, hey, River, do you think that jumper would be interested in being on the show to tell their perspective of the incident? And she said, nope, definitely not. He wants to be, or they want to be, I guess, it's he, they want to
Edit
be
that
anonymous.
out.
And I totally respected that. No pressure. I don't ever want to pressure anybody to be on the show and share their experience, but it is a place for people to allow themselves to be vulnerable and courageous, just because what you're doing by sharing your story is minimizing future outdoor accidents, right? It's like letting go of the ego and just sharing that experience with others. But this person, I'm not saying this person has a big ego. I'm not saying that at all. But I think that, there's multiple reasons why people don't want to share, which is fine.
Well, I will say, to close, for the first many months, maybe years after the accident, there was definitely an element of shame of me getting in over my head in my first season, and being looked at negatively by like the big guns in the sport, which was a barrier to sharing. But I noticed the second I put a post, there used to be a website called basejumper.com that had you have to be like certified in the crew to have access to that. So we could have like conversations that we knew wouldn't leak. And once I posted it in there, like some really like big guns in the sport, like big names, like were like, "Oh dude, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing." And that was like, I was like, "Oh, like they're not just going to shit on me and make fun of me. We're here to share knowledge,
Yes, that's so cool. So by you posting that, you have already, triggered hopefully a domino effect of other people sharing and becoming more vulnerable and courageous with this whole process of discovering the intricacies of the safety behind the sport. You know what I mean? It's amazing. So thank you.
Totally. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. This has been really awesome.